Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and good afternoon from Kunming. Kunming is the capital of Yunnan province in southern China. I've been here for about a year, but today I was just walking around and I wanted to talk about safety in China. A lot of people are curious, is it safe in China? Are you being watched all the time? What's the food like? What's the traffic like? So I want to answer some of these questions. And I'll say, to start with, China is relatively safe, and I feel pretty safe here. In many aspects, it's safer than a lot of Western countries, even the US, where I'm from. But there's some areas where it's still lagging. And the first one I'll talk about is traffic. Traffic in China is pretty terrible, pretty chaotic compared to the West. They have the same traffic laws that we do, but they don't always follow them, and they don't really enforce them either. People are always merging, not using their blinker, driving on the sidewalks, things like that. I've rarely seen somebody use their turn indicator, turn signal in China. So it's pretty chaotic, but you do get used to it after a while. There's a stereotype. I hate stereotypes, but there's a stereotype in the West that Asian or Chinese drivers are terrible drivers, and you could say it's true. I think otherwise. It is very chaotic. It looks really dangerous, but they have the system down and they're used to it. So I think they're pretty good drivers, because just there's so much chaos. You have to be good at driving if you're in all this chaos all the time. So it's not too terrible, I think. But I do see traffic incidents all the time. They're usually low-speed incidents because they usually don't drive too fast here. But I've actually been in 2 traffic accidents personally while in China. The first one, I was in a taxi, and a woman on an e-bike, on a motorcycle, hit the door, drove right into us, and it dented up the taxi, dented up her bike, and then I think she injured her leg or something. But the taxi driver didn't really stop. He just kind of looked back and kept on driving, which was pretty terrible. And then the second incident, I was on the back of an e-bike, actually one of these right here, motorcycle taxi, and we actually collided with another motorcycle taxi. And we weren't going that fast, fortunately. Kind of dinged up the bikes a little bit, but I was able to jump off, so it wasn't a big deal. But those are the 2 occasions where I've been in accidents in China. But there's also a lot of pedestrian accidents and fatalities. In the West, usually you wait for people to cross the street, but it's not the same here. A lot of people jaywalk, and even if you're not jaywalking, even if you're going in the designated area and you have your walk light on, they don't necessarily stop even if they have a red light. So you got to be careful. People drive on the wrong side of the road. You got to look both ways always. People drive on the sidewalks, like I said before. I've seen that. So it can be pretty dangerous as a pedestrian in China. So that's one thing to be aware of. Second topic I'll talk about is food safety here in China. The food safety standards here in China are pretty poor when compared to the West. In the West we have food safety administrations that are usually government ran, and they keep track of all your food from when the time the food's grown to the supermarket or the restaurant to all the way when it gets to your plate. It's kept track of, and you're pretty safe to assume that you're going to get some safe quality food. So food safety is not so much of an issue in the West, but here that doesn't exist as much, and you don't always know where your food's coming from, if it's being prepared properly. So it's pretty risky. You're always taking a risk. A lot of times there's a lot of pollution in China, of course, so you don't know where the food's being grown. A lot of times you see people growing vegetables here in the cities, just like on little plots of land. There used to be like buildings that have been torn down, which is kind of cool because people grow their own food. In the West, I mean, we have like huge refrigerator stockpile of food, frozen foods and processed foods. It sits there for months. But in China, they're more into the fresh thing. They go to their local markets every day, their wet markets, and they buy their veg and their meats and everything and cook it fresh every day, which is really healthy. But still, you don't know where it's coming from and if it's safe, because it could be going in contaminated soil. How it gets to the markets, or how it gets to the restaurants. You never know how that's going to go. It could be on the back of a motorbike or back of a truck or something. It could be dropped on the ground, not washed properly. I've seen them butchering animals in the street, just like a whole cow splayed out just in a dirty street just like this, with all the organs and meat and everything being cut up and blood everywhere. So, not too sanitary by Western standards. But it works for China, but you just have to be careful. I've only gotten food poisoning once in China. It was actual food poisoning. I had for 8 or 9 days actually. It was pretty terrible. I had a fever and everything, and I fainted, and it wasn't a good deal. And then I've had like a stomach ache on a few other occasions just from random food that I've eaten. But if you use your own good judgment, you should be fine. And also if you go to a Western restaurant, like a fancy Western restaurant in a downtown area or something, or a big chain, you're a little more on the safer side. You don't have to worry about it so much. But just like little restaurants that the locals eat at and stuff, just like these places around here. These are actually my favorite places to eat. Just little local places. They're very cheap, very delicious. But for the safety, food safety wise, you are taking a risk. I've had some of the best food I've ever had in China and some of the worst food I've ever had in China, so if that says anything. But for the most part, the food here in China is amazing, and it's different in every single province that you go to. Hello. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Next thing I wanted to talk about was, let's see, crime. Violent crimes aren't so common in China, but things like pickpocketing and maybe if you leave your valuables lying around, somebody's going to grab them. Something to be aware of. A lot of scams, especially in touristy places like Beijing or Xi'an or something like that. Something to be aware of. I've had somebody go for my wallet a couple times here in China. Fortunately, I have there are these pickpocket proof shorts that I bought especially for this trip, and they work pretty well because they went from my pocket and they didn't get anything. So just keep track of your valuables. Violent crimes, you don't have to worry about that so much. People don't target foreigners. People are usually pretty hospitable and kind to foreigners. They like to welcome you to their country. They like to show you a good time and show you how great their country can be and how nice they are. So the attitude toward foreigners, depending on the generation of people you're talking to, is pretty hospitable and kind. But there's one thing that I should say about that. Nationalist pride is something that's pretty big here in China, which it's the same as the West as well. Like in the US, for instance, where I come from, nationalistic pride is pretty big. I'm not a fan of it. I think that people should come before countries, and I mean, we're all doing the same thing. We all want the same things. We all want happiness in our lives and to be successful and take care of our families. And it's all universal wherever you go around the world with anybody. And nationalist pride gets in the way of that a lot of times. But that being said, they're really proud of their country, and you need to be careful what you say and do. You don't want to insult anybody or insult their culture or anything like that. So you just have to be respectful, and you won't have any problems. Next thing on the list, let's talk about sex. Sex. What about sex? Well, for one thing, I'm sure you're aware that China is the most populated country in the world. India is close behind and catching up, but we'll see how that goes in the future. But there's a lot of sex in China, of course, with all the people, and something to be aware of is sex education isn't really a huge thing in China. It's pretty common in the West. Everybody grows up and they go through middle school, high school, or whatever, and they learn about safe sex practices and STDs and things like that. But it's just not as developed here in China. So there is a lot of STDs, a lot of AIDS and HIV, things like that. So it's just something to be aware of, and to practice safe sex while you're here. Another important aspect about safety in China is that as a foreigner in China, you're always being watched. There's cameras everywhere. If you live here, you have to register with the local police station where you live. Sometimes your job or your school that you're at will do that for you, so you don't have to worry about it. But they always know where you are. And as a tourist going through China, everywhere you go to a hotel, you always have to bring along your passport, and they have to register it with the local police station, so they're always keeping track of where you are. It's a little scary, kind of a little 1984 Big Brother-ish, but you do get used to it, and it is comforting after a while. One thing that happened to me several months ago, me and a couple buddies, we thought we'd go out for lunch and took a taxi downtown. And after we were done, we got back at the end of the day, his GoPro was gone. He didn't know where it was at. So he thought maybe he left it in the taxi. So what he did was he went to the local police station, and they were able to use the camera footage to see all of us getting out of the building where we were living and heading to the taxi. And they were able to zoom in and see the camera in his hand. And then we got downtown, half an hour later, 15 kilometers later. Let's go down a dodgy alley, since we're talking about safety. Anyway, they were able to see us get out of the taxi downtown, and the GoPro wasn't in his hand anymore. And this was, like I said, half an hour later, 15 kilometers later. They were able to track with the cameras where we were at. And then they were able to see the registration number of the taxi. And they called up the cab company, and within an hour or so, the same taxi driver came up and delivered the GoPro. So I thought that was pretty amazing. That wouldn't really happen in the West. If you lost your GoPro somewhere, it would be gone, unless somebody was kind enough to turn it in. And this guy, I think, was going to keep it because he did take some pictures of himself on the GoPro, I think. But with the cameras, they were able to track him down and get it back. So definitely a little scary. But as I said, it's scary at first, but it is comforting after a while. But for the most part, I feel pretty safe in China. I've never felt threatened or unsafe. Like right now, I'm walking around this dodgy alleyway right now in like a local neighborhood. I've been down dodgy alleys like this at night, middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. Never had any issues at all. People are always pretty kind. They're pretty curious about seeing a foreigner, and they like to welcome you to their country. So overall, China is pretty safe. There's just a few things to be careful of. Speaking of safe, I just slipped right there. So watch where you're walking in China, so you never know what you're gonna find. Sorry about that, I got a little distracted. When I was in that back alleyway, I was looking at this camera here, and I was looking over some prostitutes, which I thought was kind of funny because I was just talking about like safe sex in China, and wasn't looking where I was going and slipped, and they started cracking up, and then I started cracking up. But anyway, to wrap up this video, I'll just say that in my experience, China is a really safe country. Like I said, there's a few areas where it's still lagging behind, but if you just use common sense and your own good judgment, you'll be fine. Everybody in China is really nice, really kind, really hospitable. They love foreigners. They're really curious about us, and they like to take the opportunity to welcome us to their country and show us a good time. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.